Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Charlie. Always fun to be interacting with yourselves and my friends at VJHemonc. I'm the executive director of the Mace Cancer Center at UT Health San Antonio, MD Anderson. I found Twitter to be really a very, very helpful tool. My focus is on myeloproliferative neoplasms, but in addition, I run a cancer center and have a lot of interest in health equity, health policy, and a range of issues, as do many of my colleagues here on this very multidisciplinary panel. Twitter is a great tool. It really is a way to be able to concisely communicate with specific groups, and I think to be able to convey very specific messages or links, in particular to important findings, papers, manuscripts, RFAs, etc. Is it the most cutting edge tool? My children are in their early 20s, and they say almost by definition, if it's a social media tool that I'm using, it's not cutting edge. In fact, kind of the moment that I master a social media tool, they pretty much leave. But I have found that it's an incredibly useful way, in particular, for hematologists, medical oncologists, and those of us in the medical community to be communicating with each other. We've got a wonderful multidisciplinary panel. Why don't we circulate around for people to both introduce themselves as well as give just a little bit of their insights, how they got started on Twitter and why. So perhaps, Meryl, why don't you go next? You are still muted, Meryl.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here among these experts of Twitter and also in their professional lives. I'm from Ankara, Turkey. I've been, I think I'm a senior hematologist who has been focused in plasma cell disorders for more than 20 years. And I think in the Twitter business, it's, I agree that it's not for youngsters, but for instance, for our medical school students, I have noticed what type of data they share. So I kind of do intelligence about their communications, but my priority is keeping track of up-to-date information from congresses. And also it gives me the opportunity to connect with the source of data. So if you give a response, they reply, and this is wonderful. I think we are in Turkey. We are in a different time zone, and I can catch up with their activity. This is amazing.
Wonderful. Saad, what's your perspective?
Thanks, Ruben. I'm Saad Usmani. I'm a hematologist and stem cell transplant person focused on myeloma and plasma cell disorders. I'm based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And I got into Twitter about a decade ago thinking it was the cool thing to do. And at that time, it was the coolest thing on social media circuits. This is before Instagram and others became popular. So I thought I was cool with my kids at that time, but I guess, I'm in the same boat as you are, Ruben. I've utilized Twitter for the same reasons that you've highlighted, interacting with other peers and colleagues and sharing data, or giving very specific, concise comments on new data that's coming out and participating in debates. And you also interact with patient advocates as well as trainees on social media on specific topics as well. And especially around the time of big congresses, that creates a lot of goodwill and good interactions, and really brings us all together as we're looking at these data. I think the last year and a half has been extremely enlightening. During the pandemic, a lot of research collaborations have arisen through simple interactions, on a platform like Twitter. with peers as well as trainees. And Ruben, you're involved with, many of us are involved with ASH and ASCO platforms where we interact with trainees. We couldn't see them in person for the past year and a half. So that was another way of interacting with your mentees through ASH and ASCO at other institutions. I think that's, I'm a big Twitter fan, even though, I may be considered a social media dinosaur now.
Wonderful. Jordan, what's your perspective?
Well, thanks. So my perspective is Twitter's great. Twitter's a bit dangerous too. It's easy to spend too much time on it, but a great tool to promote your own work, the work of your colleagues, of your mentees. So that's extremely powerful. I think we're just building a thread of tweets detailing a recent paper you've published, for example, that something you're passionate about when you think that's being not necessarily well addressed in the literature. So you could really roll out your thoughts. And I think people really like that. You can illustrate with with some figures if you want to, use GIFs, or you can make it quite educational and a little less constrained compared to what you would read in Blood or in a standard medical journal. So you get a bit of that feel on Twitter that's a little bit more lighthearted. People can actually give more insights in their actual opinions. So that's kind of nice. You can debate some controversial topics. You have to be a little careful with that, I think. I don't think the platform is ideal for deep discussions or deep conversations. And I hope our field can find better platforms to do that and there are already some sort of collaborative platforms where people can really interact and share maybe more links and be more detailed in their answers. So to really get get into a deep conversation. And again, staying up to date is obviously extremely easy with Twitter. And if you follow the right people, you're going to know what's going on in the field. If there's a breaking news, a press release, and we had one today with the Transform interim analysis and for lymphoma patients. So that gets spread out very quickly. And if you didn't know about it, quickly you will be looped in, and you can ask questions, interact. So that's my experience in a nutshell with Twitter.
Wonderful. Now, Major, what about your thoughts and maybe even any pearls you might have on your profile and building up a base of some followers?
Well, thank you. My name is Maziar Shadman. I'm a lymphoma CLL physician and immunotherapy physician at Fred Hutchinson University of Washington. I think the number of my followers is probably less than most of you on the panel, so I may not be the right person to answer that question. But I can tell you, for me, Twitter started as another social media, but I did a few right choices at the beginning, and I followed right people. So I ended up really getting firsthand access to reactions from the experts in the field about new literature that's coming out. For me, it became kind of the title watch for, maybe for lymphoid malignancies or what we do. We know the literature and we know the field and the how colleagues think about the new data. But for me, for example, if there's a new study comes out of the plasma cell world, and I would like to see how the leaders in the field react to it. So that's for me, it's probably the most interesting aspect of Twitter. Very quickly, I know what some thought leader think about the new data. There are some superficial discussion on the Twitter. I agree with Jordan that maybe it's not the best platform to have deep discussions. I think the key, maybe one pearl, is to follow the right people depending on what you're looking for. I mean, for me, I would love to have maybe selected number of experts that I follow. And, in terms of, I haven't been really trying to add to my followers, to be honest. I think overall, this happens, and depending on what you tweet about, and what I found probably mostly after national meetings, or if you have a publication and you talk about it, I mean, you get some reactions, but again, I may not be the right person to answer that question. We have people with tens of thousands of followers in this panel.
Wonderful. Now, there are truly some masters of Twitter and social media, and people like Naveen Pramaraju come to mind, Mike Thompson, and others that they do really an extraordinary job. Naveen, maybe give folks maybe a pearl or two from your experience on how you think using Twitter might be the most effective. And then maybe also just comment a bit, how do you handle kind of personal social media pieces versus kind of professional ones?
Ruben, thank you. And Saad and Jordan and Nitin, I see so many of you. Professor Moti is joining us from France. Thanks, guys, Charlie and everyone. So this is important what Ruben brought up. I think we have now shown, and I personally have done, social media and Twitter is no longer a hobby or a side gig or something amusing. It has become an essential part of my academic and career development. I just want to repeat that, an essential part of the academic and career development. The two major pearls I can use is, one, it's not bragging to put out your group's paper or your latest accomplishment. It is actually informing the public and your colleagues. And if you're Saad Usmani, every week you have a new New England Journal paper, you need to let people know about that. So it is important to transform this concept of, oh, this is humble brag, this is too much focus. No. If you don't get your work out there to the people who need to know about it, nobody's looking on PubMed except for a fellow who's reporting on a review article. So I think it's an imperative to build the career and personal brand because you need to know who's connecting with you. The second pearl, Ruben, for you and me, and those of us in rare and ultra rare blood cancers, even MPNs, even just a few years ago, without having an approved drug, we must get rare diseases out there, inform and aware to patients and caregivers. And you and I and others have started some of these rare disease community. Ruben, as you and I have always said, it doesn't matter how rare a disease is. If you have it, if you're an N of one, you and your family have it. Now on Twitter, because of these hashtag communities that you and I and others have done, we're able to communicate directly with people. And finally, if you have personal and private posts, I personally think it's okay to mix in a few things about the personal life every once in a while, if you feel comfortable, to show that you're not a robot, to show that you have a life outside. Yes, let's keep things professional. Let's keep things general. If there's a specific question about a clinical thing, hey, I have a hematocrit of 47, let's take it offline. But Ruben, this is basically what I think. I think it's a very imperative thing that all of us use the social media to reach people with information that they need about rare and life-threatening cancers. Ruben?
I agree strongly. I can just share my own experience that, I view Twitter as a great communication tool for professional issues, both my hat in MPNs, but also my hat as a cancer center director that might be some different topics. If I want to share pictures of my kids, which I do that on Instagram and have a very different group of people I interact with, or Facebook. A couple other very professional venues that are heavily utilized. LinkedIn, again, is another place where there's a lot of great professional type posts that can be a little broader, more medical community. Even doximetry and others. So I think the venue, that's one way I have decided to do it. I've seen other people also have different accounts. I have a Twitter account that's very professional, but if you have a Twitter account where you feel, very strong about any number of things, political or other, sometimes it is helpful to have two accounts. But more than one way that people have tackled that. Now, Nitin, you have been very active on social media. You're doing some extraordinary work. Maybe share both some of your perspectives, but also some perspective on Twitter around congresses. How does Twitter enhance, the experience at an ASH, an ASCO, an EHA?
Thanks, Ruben. I would say that, looking at many of you guys, I'm not as active on Twitter, and just a shout out to Naveen, who's a very close friend, and who was the one who got me started on Twitter back now some years ago. So, I have used Twitter. I use Twitter. I'm not that, I would say, active on Twitter. If certainly what I've learned from you all, I think if I have some kind of a manuscript coming along or publication, doing kind of this, I just did my first, multiple tweets together, tutorial.
You just did your first tutorial.
For a paper. And I was trying to figure out, I asked Naveen, I asked a few other people, okay, how do you do this closely? Some said, go to the desktop, or you can do it on the iPhone. So I end up doing on the iPhone, but I was worried I would make some mistakes. But I think it was, I could, whatever concepts I wanted to bring it out from the paper, the figures, I was able to do it. And I got some decent amount of, press in that sense.
Right.
I think regarding the congresses, I think just, following up, obviously the major players, major people who are tweeting, obviously most of the important abstracts, many people are tweeting about the same time. And I think you can get perspective. I think some of the tweets are just letting you know something is being reported. But if there is some discussion going on with some senior thought leaders about what this abstract means, I think those are very informative discussions. And again, if depending on the field it is, if it's ALL, CLL, which I do, certainly I can chime in with my thoughts as well. So I think that certainly has been helpful. And I'm kind of learning this field with you all to get more active.
Wonderful. Now, Mohammed, you clearly have used Twitter exceptionally well to help bring together and communicate regarding stem cell transplantation, particularly with your many leadership roles in the world of transplant. How do you view that Twitter really helps to bring together a community like the transplant community?
Yeah, well, definitely. I think this is really a very timely topic and discussion, and I'm very glad that VJ Hemong is bringing this topic into the podium. Besides whether it's transplant, whether it's myeloma, whether it's MPN, today, I think the debate about whether should we use Twitter or not reminds me of the debate a few years ago of some people, should we have a cell phone versus, your traditional phone? I remember many people, and I'm sure our grandfathers had this debate whether you should rely on horses or whether, cars are going to make it. So this debate, in my opinion, is that, show me someone in our field who is not using a smartphone or a computer. So social media in general, and Twitter especially, is increasingly, I think, important in patient care, academic project, interactions, collaborations. You have queries answered more quickly, project and task can likely advance faster. It allows for some camaraderie and support. You can express your viewpoints. There is also a feeling of being less intimidated compared to face-to-face discussion. And of course, it's a tool for freedom. It's like communication without borders. You are bringing all stakeholders together from all over the world to share experiences. And there is a true added value and help in many situations: education, awareness, dissemination of knowledge. And since everybody wants to be eco-friendly these days, it is environmentally friendly. So, I think Jordan alluded a few minutes ago to the press release from, 4 p.m. my time or 3 p.m. About the Marolocell CAR T-cell construct, the Transform randomized trial, highlighting the superiority of CAR T-cells over auto-transplant in high-grade lymphoma. Obviously, this is not my cup of tea, but as a hematologist, this is probably a breakthrough for all of us, having CAR T-cells likely to replace auto-transplant. So auto-transplant are going to retire probably very soon in high-grade lymphoma, relapsed high-grade lymphoma. Well, thanks to Twitter, I think instantly we were all aware of it. And I was able even to communicate with a couple of colleagues as part of our educational activities, including Jordan, actually. I don't know if you looked to your email, Jordan, a few minutes ago, saying, well, can we organize something around it to dissect these results, to analyze them and share them with the community? How long would it take you to wait until you see the final article? Obviously, it doesn't replace the final article, but we live in an era where, having things disseminated in a timely manner can be of great value. And actually, whenever you have an article, the New England Journal of Medicine is released on Thursday. A few hours later, you have superb analysis by the top experts across the globe about the content of the article, something where you would need, hours and days and weeks. I remember when I was a student waiting for the paper journal arriving and reading it and highlighting it in yellow and red and things like this. So, those guys it's like, a high-speed train. There are people who are in the first car, but I'm convinced that everybody will join at every stop. People will get on board. And if they don't want, well, unfortunately, we can't do anything about it.
Wonderful. And now, why don't we pivot a bit and people can chime in kind of as they wish, both on what they view as a really well-constructed medical tweet, or maybe some examples of something someone did in a tweet that just really, really didn't work. Because I think we can all agree there's some people who really do it well, and there's others that are a bit, clumsier. And Naveen, I know you've given this a lot of thought. Maybe give a couple examples. What makes for a really good medical tweet? Does it have a bunch of pictures? Is it mainly one link? Is it long? Is it short? Does it have 20 hashtags? Does it have 2? What do you think?
Yeah, Ruben, thank you. I think there's a science, there's an anatomy of the tweet now, I think, and it does have, I would say, 4 features that you have to have. One is you must have a link to whatever you're talking about. We now know, and I've done analysis with Mike Thompson, you and others, that if you have a link in your tweet, a functioning link, and not to be funny about it, but make sure that the link works, right? You can even get shortened links depending on the form you use. So let's take the basic tweet that we all do, new paper from you or your group, have a link that works and seriously check it. So either PubMed or to the journal itself. Number 2 is I want you to try to put a picture in there, some kind of a picture, even if it's a new journal article. Professor Modi does this very well, where he will you'll read from your iPad, I think, blood paper, either from your group or someone else, and he will put the actual journal. It's very nice. It's that feel of seeing a paper journal in your hand, but you see all the authors, affiliations. Actually, very nice the way you do that. So have a link that works, have a picture. Number 3, Ruben, as you mentioned, hashtags. Hashtag, to remind everyone, is a category. You have 2 choices. You can pick a hashtag that already exists, MPN-SM, myeloproliferative neoplasm social media, BPDCN, or you can invent one. So Jordan, right, if you want to invent some new hashtag for CAR T, something else you want to do, you can put it out there. Maybe crickets to begin with, but you can put it out there and then start using that and see if it catches on. But 1 or 2 key hashtags. And then there's a 4th factor. You can tag people that either are directly involved in your project, or, as many of us do together, bring in some of the other folks that you think may be related. Muhammad and I do this, Saad and I do this, Ruben, sometimes I'll tag you. Yeah, it can be annoying sometimes. So you should know your audience, right? So you have to make sure, because then if you're tagging someone, then they're going to be on all the retweets and all the likes. So I just want to review. So these 4 components, right? You have the functioning link, you have a picture, you have a hashtag category, and you tag the appropriate people. This makes for a high yield, productive tweet, and it allows you yourself to reference back to it, and then anybody else who's seeing it. And then it makes for a nice retweet. So these, I think, are the characteristics that all of us should strive to on all of our tweets.
Wonderful. And does anyone have an example of something they've seen done that they think really isn't ideal and should be avoided?
I guess One thing I was just thinking of, because you're right, we have to say that too. Sometimes jokes fall flat on Twitter. I think I have to say that. So, if you think about your own text threads, sometimes a joke falls flat on Twitter. I would just caution everyone, and even our thought leaders here, our patients are on Twitter. Patient advocates are on Twitter. Grant funding agencies are on Twitter. Pharma, bio-investors, they're watching this session right now as it's going on. So I would caution, particularly our thought leaders, think twice before you put a joke out there, because the way it sounds in your head may not be what it looks like on the text. Saad, I was wondering I think you may have about to say something. What do you think about that?
I was going to say exactly, that you have to, stay classy, right? So I think that's doesn't matter if it is, a personal tweet or comment, and you're right. I mean, this is a very binary kind of a way of communicating. Yes, you can add GIFs or, other things to make your comment a bit more animated. But you have to be careful on the way that you're communicating, and just, it's not the same as me and Naveen, hanging out, for dinner and joking around with each other.
Right.
This is a very different format.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe there is a huge risk of misunderstandings that require lengthy explanations that are not feasible. Also, we should not forget that there is a constant flow. You have frequent interruptions, so even your reasoning is going to be cut. And we have these fragmented, very brief statements, which can be a hindrance to creativity and intense focus. So you really need to be very well structured and be humble about it. And you have to adopt. I mean, I remember I've given talk about this in one of the last ASH meetings. And my only message was, okay, you want to get involved, then you have to create your terms of reference, your charter. How do you want to tweet? Because also it's about freedom. Because we should not forget, I mean, the idea is not to tell everybody, all of us have to do the same. Well, in that case, I think I will lose much interest. My interest is about that Naveen, for instance, has always these nice pictures on the weekends about, the weather, the landscape, which I don't do personally, but I like his style. And Saad has a different style. Miral has a totally different style in commenting things. So we need to stick to this freedom, but this needs to be like you define your rules and you stick to the rules. You can't just jump and do anything you like.
Wonderful. Master, you had your hand up?
Yeah, just I agree totally. And as maybe to be a little bit more specific, it's very easy to forget that our network is beyond our colleagues, as it was mentioned, because many patients, I mean, sometimes I'm in the clinic and a patient tells me, oh, I saw your tweet. And I was like, oh, okay. So I have audiences outside the professional colleagues. And so we may, for example, there may be drugs that are approved for different indications, and we may have questions or comments about the regulatory process, and we may not all agree on the type of study that led to the approval. But I think it's important to remember that somewhere in the world, there are patients who benefit from that drug. So to question or to kind of make fun of medications, we have to kind of remember that even colleagues who make those comments, they definitely don't mean to question the drug and access to that drug. It's a totally academic discussion, but it's for those who are not in the field, it's very difficult to explain. So I would really try to avoid it, but it's difficult. Sometimes you forget because majority of our network colleagues are silent, and we only see that 5 to 10% who speak, and they're mainly physicians and academicians.
No, your point is a really good one. I like to use the standard. If you did not feel comfortable standing in front of the plenary session at ASH and reading that tweet out over the microphone, don't put it on Twitter, because again, it is an open audience and it is out there. So I think, again, that's why the tone, and even if it's personal, it should be at least something that, again, you would feel very comfortable, presenting in front of your church, or religious group. I mean, it's something you have to be really, really comfortable behind. Now, sometimes, of course, we'll be tweeting, we'll hit send, and we realize we misspelled something. We might want to frame it differently. The link was wrong, something of that nature. Maybe someone walk us through, maybe Nitin, why don't you walk us through, how do you correct a tweet?
Well, I was going to say one quick point. Recently, I had to delete a tweet because MD Anderson, the social media group, reached out to me. So I tweeted, it's a generic thing about a patient who left hospice and my clinic patient. I was just sad about it. So I just said something very generic, and they basically said, I cannot say anything about the patient. And this is, so anyways, I had a lot of back and forth with them, but they didn't relent. I had to delete the tweet. That's the only first and only time I had to delete a tweet. I would say if you, as far as I know, you cannot edit a tweet, I guess, right? I mean, you have to delete your tweet and I think there are some, new versions of Twitter, maybe they're looking into this edit function, but as far as I know, I've never edited a tweet, but I have, as I said, recently I had to delete a tweet for this possible HIPAA compliance issue, which I didn't see there was a HIPAA compliance, but MD Anderson didn't agree.
Correct. You're absolutely correct. You delete a tweet, and then kind of repost. And Naveen, any other kind of practical suggestions around that?
I think, as you both mentioned, there's no edit function. We and others have sort of lobbied Twitter to do that, and I think they will incorporate that soon. No, I think the only other principle to remind our thought leaders and our other folks is I would approach Twitter the same way you would if you are giving a radio, TV, journal interview. So old media and social media have a lot more in common than we remember and think. This is something that someone can take a screenshot of, even if you delete and whatever you think you're doing. So someone can take a screenshot of whatever you said. So approach it with good faith. Think 2 or 3 times before you click submit. Please don't click submit, late at night, or you're, as Mohammed was nicely met. I really appreciate what you said. You get interrupted, you get paged. Oh, let's send this off quickly. If you have a typo, I hate to say this, but you have a typo that then has a different meaning, that may or may not always be received well. So I would just say, think twice. Don't do Twitter in quick, stolen moments. If you're going to do it earnestly, as Mohammed mentioned. If you make a real mistake, right? So yeah, then delete it. And then also, it's not wrong to send out an apology tweet. Hey guys, I was hastily tweeting. I had a couple of typos. It was pointed out to me. So clarify quickly, early, prevent if you can, and then get out in front if you make a real error. Now for random things, okay, there's some good faith there. I think the last issue is if you see suspicious or not good activity, always feel empowered to report it. Yes, you can personally block people on Twitter, but you can also report quickly as well too. And that's to protect yourself and other people in your community. People think there's someone policing Twitter. It's a self-policed community. So Ruben, I think those are some strategies, but just remember that this is media, and anything with media can be permanent, archived, and then referenced later. So you do want to give good faith effort in everything you put out there.
And I would like to add, Ruben, because you nicely alluded to this question, at the plenary session at ASH. So in general, even when you ask a silly question at the plenary session, at least in the normal era, at some point, it's going to be forgotten, or, very few people will remember it. Whereas when it comes to social media and Twitter, it will be on the cloud forever. And even if, someone is telling me I will delete it, but you may have someone who took a screenshot at some point, and kept it there forever. So you need the level of vigilance should be even higher. And this is why actually I have never heard of a tweeting activity as a matter of life or death, as an emergency. So it can always wait, unless, we are doing a sort of a friendly competition with Naveen and Saad and Jordan, who's going to tweet, the first slide first. But this is nothing very bad. we usually do it in a very friendly fashion. Otherwise, it can wait. Take your time.
Now, I'm mindful that I think every panelist on this panel speaks at least 2 languages, or likely for some of you, several more. So maybe any experiences in terms of, the language that you choose to tweet in, or do you sometimes tweet in more than one language? Meryl, what's your experience with the Turkish community?
Well, I think there's the translation facility that is possible. And sometimes, of course, the translation doesn't work exactly, especially in professional field. But when I have seen people messaging in 2 languages, the same message, to reach a broader audience. But from my point of view, people in our profession, in our country, they attend congresses and they can follow in English and future German and French. So this is not a major issue. I wanted to highlight something else, but I think we have more time about threads, Twitter threads.
Please.
So I wanted to acknowledge Vincent Rajkumar, who is a good, who is one of the, pioneers in this field. But I also want to acknowledge the former ASH president, David Steensma. He history of hematology. And when I found it out, I was so much impressed by it. It's like you were very right about archiving. His threads are really archives. I really recommend people who haven't seen it to go and visit his old threads.
I would definitely agree. I always view David, who's a good friend, as really being kind of a deep historian in hematology with really just a love of the field. And again, I think sometimes bringing some of those really interesting complementary things, to your communications can sometimes be wonderful. Now, Twitter sometimes has some helpful tools that we can use. One that I think sometimes has been underutilized, but when it's been utilized, I think can be interesting, is the use of Twitter polls. I know I've put a couple out there. Again, someone will present an abstract. It's a plenary, it's an oral that's on a trial, and we'll float out there, is this going to change your practice or not? And it's interesting to get people's feedback on that real time. Have any of you used that, found it helpful or suggestion?
Well, I've used polls. I mean, mainly for some controversial topics, I would tag tens of colleagues, or sometimes annoying. I got private messages that untag me, so maybe. But when you want to get everybody's opinion, that I've done that, and it has been helpful. I think. I wouldn't do it too much, probably once every couple of months or something. But, on very general topics, I think it's helpful. When it gets too specific, picking between the drugs, and I don't know if that would be the right kind of use for polling. But yeah, I've found them helpful.
And I think this is really, I can confirm that this can be very helpful. Last year, we were working with some colleagues on a project on how to define, ruxolitinib refractory acute GVHD. And obviously, we did a poll on Twitter. Obviously, there are some limitations because sometimes you don't know exactly who's responding and what are the credentials. But usually in such highly specialized topics, and at least as far as I'm concerned, I'm mainly in a hematology environment and transplant environment. Actually, believe it or not, this poll is now referenced in a blood paper in the discussion of one of our blood papers. And actually, the reviewers liked it a lot because they knew that we didn't only invent, we as co-authors, this definition, But we proposed this, and we have asked, I think we had around 100 responders, and it was quite logical, in the field. I mean, I could suspect what would be the answer, but it's always better to get, the exact percentage. And this is referenced in a blood paper. So it gives you a flavor of the importance of these polls. Obviously, I agree with Maziar. I don't like these polls about guys who are really very rude, and they want to highlight that you should not use this drug, this is useless. These are always extreme guys, it's always black and white. But otherwise, they can be extremely useful.
Wonderful. We've just got a couple minutes left. Maybe I'll throw one final question at Naveen. As you see a tweet, you can like it, you can retweet it, or you can quote tweet the tweet. Any comments on when to use each of those?
Ooh, yes. I think particularly for our colleagues at various levels, whether you're more beginner, advanced, or somewhere in between, I think you have to use a strategy. I know I'm taking some of the fun out of this for some folks, but I think, as Mohammed has mentioned and you have, there should be some thought behind what you're doing. I want everyone out there to try to build a personal brand or program. That's kind of my last thing, and I think that's what Mohammed is saying as well. Have a program that you're doing, have a uniformity. I think is good to use as a bookmark. This is something that I think is great. I'm going to look at it later. It's not an endorsement, although it has the heart there, right? So that's a bit problematic. So be careful when you put the like, especially if you're liking something that's controversial. The retweet is your most powerful maneuver, because that means you are essentially, no one likes to use the word endorse, but you're saying, hey, I like this. I want all of my followers to see it. But the real advanced one is the quote tweet. If you have the time, so I always retweet myself, and then I will do the quote tweet. You first give the hat trick or, the hat tip to the person who tweeted. So make sure you include their handle, and then you give your own commentary on top of that, particularly positive commentary. And then now you build on what they said. Hey, this guy published on central nervous system and BPDCN or whatever. Here's our experience. This is what we think. And then that way you can start a conversation. Either the original person can retweet, can comment, or somebody new. So if you have the time, the quote tweet with giving the hat tip to the original person is the highest form of Twitter appreciation. Finally, I do want to say this, that who you follow matters, because other people can see who you're following too. So again, when you're thinking about Twitter, go away from it being a hobby to a serious part of your academic career. And think about that. What you like on Twitter, somebody can see it. So I know what Jordan liked today because it shows up in my feed. Jordan Gauthier liked these things. So think about that. And on LinkedIn, the same thing. If you look on someone's profile, it tells you that they looked at it. So you have to be mindful of the audience. Maziar, I think you nicely brought that up as well, that you never know who's in your network and who's looking. So pay attention, be honest and be forthright, correct mistakes when you can, and don't be afraid to retweet and quote tweet others' work that you find to be fascinating.
Well, wonderful. Well, this truly has been a masterclass. I could say I certainly have learned a lot from each of you. It's been a wonderful discussion. Maybe I'll hand it back to Charlie to help close us off as we're kicking off this almost marathon of EHA. I think EHA goes on for about 9 weeks from now until about mid-August.